So the next project up in the shop is a floating shelf, and this is actually a shelf that I'm making for my church, Salina First, and this is going to house all of our kids' check-in equipment. There's 2 tablet PCs as well as name tag printers, and right now there's just kind of a jumbled mess of cords. This is actually a floating wall shelf. It will go flush to our wall, and then they will sit on top here. One of my biggest hurdles as a woodworker is my artistic ability is terrible, and so I have to try and sketch things up, but I'm really bad at that. But basically we're going to have a box design, 2 drawers for storage, and it's going to slide onto this wall bracket, which is basically a sideways E. So it's going to be about 4 feet by 1 feet. This is just going to be made out of solid pine, and then I'll make this out of dimensional lumber. The other problem with dimensional lumber is it has rounded over edges, and so because it's going to be a wall bracket, I want it to sit really square to the wall and really square to the box. And so I'm going to go ahead and take 1/4 inch off each side of my dimensional lumber, this 2x6, and make it 5 inches total, but that way it'll give me nice square edges. So let's get started. Here, I just want to go ahead and pre-drill all the holes. This is for the frame that's actually going to hold up the floating shelf. I want to pre-drill all the holes to prevent splitting, and then drilling 3 screws into each board. That should give it plenty of strength. Obviously, what really is going to be the test is getting this attached to the wall, making sure it's mounted with some good studs, at least a couple studs, and then that's going to hold it on the wall really nicely. So here's a picture of the pine I'm using. It's 6 feet long. I've got 2 of these, and I'm using them for the top, bottom, and sides. I'm going to go ahead and use my crosscut sled on my table saw to make the big cuts. This is much easier than using like a miter saw because it's such a thick piece of wood at 1 foot thick. So I need to, I made miter cuts all around the outside of the box here, and I want to add each side piece like this. So it's going to make for mitered corners around the frame. And there's a little bit of gap in there. That's not so much the big deal as tightness top and bottom. So I'm going to have to glue up these miter joints, but because this is end grain, it just sops up the glue. And so I'm going to use a couple brads as well, and then maybe even drive a couple screws in once it's kind of dry. I just don't want these joints to come apart. So that's kind of the next step. Okay, so in the shelf there's going to be 2 drawers, and I'm going to make each one of those drawers out of 1/2 inch plywood, and here I am just ripping down sheets for the fronts and the sides of the drawers. So what I'm going to do now is cut all the drawer pieces, the fronts and the backs, and I set up a stop block right here so I can get easy repeatable cuts. I'm making 2 drawer sizes the same size, so I just butt it up against the stop block, run my crosscut sled over it. That way I can get 4 pieces exactly the same size, and I don't have to worry about any variance in that regard. Just go ahead and make the cuts. I'm going to square up one side first, so I know that I have a perfect 90 degree off the back of my fence. So I need to cut a rabbet in the bottom of all my boards to accept the drawer bottom that I'm making for the case. And so I went ahead and installed my dado stack with a sacrificial fence here. and I've got it tuned in for a 1/4 inch up and a 1/4 inch over, give or take, which will tap the 1/4 inch plywood for the bottom. Let's go ahead and mill these up. So each board will now have a rabbet in the back end to accept that piece of plywood. Let's see it there. So this is actually the bottom. The bottom will drop in to that rabbet and it'll sit flush. So I need to sand my front of my drawers here, and because of the way my drawer design went, I had to use nail holes, which I wanted to avoid, but I couldn't for reasons you all don't care about, even if you've made it this far into this video. So I need to sand these, and I got to take off as much nail hole filler as possible. Nail hole filler is great because it obviously covers nail holes from the brad nailer, but it stains the wood in some respects, so you really have to sand it down to make it nice and flush and get a good coat of stain on it. So I'm just going to take my sponge sander and go to town. This is an 80 grit, and we'll work through the grits. Pre-stained my shelf here with Minwax pre-stain, and what that does is going to allow the second coat, which is the actual colored pigment stain, to go on nice and even. Pine is a really soft wood, and so what that means is the stain can go and absorb at different levels, and you can get a really blotchy effect if you don't use the pre-stain. So now I'm going to go ahead and coat this with a really heavy coat of stain, let that sit for a couple minutes because I want a nice rich brown color on here. Let's go. So I finished this project with several coats of wipe-on polyurethane satin finish. I didn't want a real heavy sheen, and overall this came out great. This is going to be the wall that it sits up on at the church once it's mounted. It's going to hold our check-in printers and tablet PCs, and it really worked out great. I'm very happy with how this came out. Really happy with it.